Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and in today's video we're going to be going over everything you will need to know before the Miami Grand Prix for F1 Fantasy. So before we get into that, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow my Twitter, as I'll be updating everyone on F1 Fantasy over on Twitter. Join my Discord if you want help on any F1 Fantasy related questions. And of course, join my league if you want to. We've got around 555 people in it at the minute. Thank you all so much for joining. And before we get into the video, let's have a look at how well my team did last week. And 359 points. Of course, I used the no negative. So yes, I did get quite a few less points than the Limitless. But however, no negative was the right move for my team at the time, and I'm extremely happy with how it all worked out. However, team value wise, it was pretty rubbish. However, we're going to bounce back this week and hopefully do well. So without further ado, let's get into everything you need to know. So first off, again, Miami is the second sprint race of the season. And what does that mean? Team deadline hack. That's right. Again, like last week, the sprint qualifying isn't the team deadline. No. It's actually the sprint race itself. So for anyone who wants to use chips or just know what team they're going to use, this is the perfect opportunity these weekends to know who exactly looks best. Because let's say, for instance, you don't know who to pick over Perez, Leclerc, Sainz. Fun fact, you'll have a look at qualifying, sort of get the gist of Ferrari are quicker than Perez at the moment, or if it's going to be another 1-2 Red Bull, and you can sort that into your team. Again, with your lower drivers, you can do the exact same thing. So it's really useful, sort of a cheat code like I've mentioned. However, it's in the game, so you should be taking full advantage of it. Now, because of all of this, I will be going live after the sprint qualifying. Now, let's talk about some key topics. So the first one we need to talk about is the budget building teams. Now, I've already talked about how it's kind of been ruined over the last few weekends, and that's because the Verstappen teams are mostly getting the same increases as the budget teams. And like we saw in China, if you had the Verstappen team over the Perez team, you could have had one of the worst Verstappen teams compared to the best Perez, Sainz, Leclerc team, and you would have been getting similar points. It's so worth bringing in the Verstappen team at the minute. However, if you don't have enough funds, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz teams still are the way to go. But 100%, unless you're going for the extra DRS team, you still have to have Red Bull Ferrari. You can't be having Red Bull Aston Martin, Red Bull Visa, McLaren Ferrari builds for now. However, I talk about having the Red Bull Ferrari teams. Another thing you need to be careful of is McLaren bringing not as big upgrades as they will be in Austria. However, upgrades that will improve their race pace. Now, McLaren are hoping this can push them towards Ferrari. And if this does happen, like I've said, this is perfect timing because we're going to know. We're going to know if they look good in qualifying. And if their upgrades work, that will move into race pace. So if McLaren look good, then you potentially could be looking at Red Bull McLaren teams. And that's for the Limitless teams as well. Then again, the best constructors to use this weekend, which I've sort of said already, Red Bull, Ferrari, potentially McLaren. Best driver under 7 million to have, well, I'll say 7.1 million to have Zhou would definitely be Sargent. Again, Sauber, until they fix their issues with reliability and pit stops, you got to steer a bit clear of them. Of course, if you can't, like even I've got Bottas in my team, if you can't get rid of them fully, then just have one maximum Sauber driver. So for me, Sargent still is the best driver for less than 7.1 million. Now for drivers under 8 million, still has to be Nico Hülkenberg. Yes, sometimes he can qualify too well, and when he does, it's sort of an issue. However, in that Haas, it looks so much better than the Williams or the Alpines, which are his other contenders for under 8 million, Gasly and Albon. So for under 8 million, I would say Hülkenberg best, Gasly second, Albon third. Now that is if Alpine go back to being rubbish. However, if Alpine still look okay and they're qualifying like 15th, 16th, then I would go for Albon instead over Gasly. Now we move on to the low medium cost drivers. So that's Stroll down to the likes of Yuki Tsunoda. And for me, Stroll, if you have the Perez, Leclerc, Sainz team, is a must. However, if you don't have those teams, steer clear of him. Daniel Ricciardo, for me, he's a no-go on anyone's team. He's too expensive, and the likes of Magnussen and Tsunoda are much better options. Then we have Esteban Ocon at 9 million, and I think this is the worst price for driver, considering Gasly is going to give you basically the same job. And an Alpine at 9 million, it's ridiculous. Yes, he went up 0.5 million last weekend. And yes, he got 12 points, which isn't too bad. However, you have so many better drivers around him, which I'm about to talk about. Like, for instance, Kevin Magnussen at 8.7 million. Now, Magnussen's starting to get a little bit expensive. However, if you have him in your team, he's perfectly good to have. We saw in China, he almost got over 20 points in a sprint race, which is ridiculous. And it's because he got so many overtakes points. Again, like I can't stress enough, bad at qualifying, Magnussen's very good at. In both races, he just got loads of overtakes. So Magnussen definitely is one to keep an eye on for your teams. And for me, he's joint first place for cheap drivers you can put in your team. Now, who's he joint first with? That would be Yuki Tsunoda. Now, again, he had a bad race last weekend, but in Australia and Japan, he was pretty consistent, getting 11 points and 10 points. And get this, with the minus 20, Yuki Tsunoda still only got minus 6 points. What does that mean? Take off the minus 20, he would have got 14 points. And guess who crashed into him? Kevin Magnussen. But, yeah. So Yuki Tsunoda still is a very good option, even though it looks like he had a bad weekend, only getting 14 points. If he didn't get unlucky in China, he would have been again up there with Magnussen as one of the better drivers to have. So Yuki Tsunoda, joint first place for drivers under 13 million. So my list would be Lance Stroll if you have Perez, Leclerc and Sainz team. If not, Lance Stroll at the bottom, Magnussen and Tsunoda at the top, then with Ricciardo, then with Ocon. Now, again, we have to talk about the Perez Leclerc Sainz team. Again, I can't stress this enough. Unless you have less than 108.4 million in your cost cap, that is the only reason you should be running these teams. However, if McLaren upgrades do look good, Lando Norris is an option. Now, it's a riskier option considering he's more expensive than all three of them. So is there a real reason to go for him? Potentially, again, if he did what he did in China. Of course, there was a bit of luck at play, but Norris got pole in the sprint quali and second place in the actual race. Yes, he had a bad sprint race, but if he can keep that pace up, he is definitely one to look out for this weekend in Miami. And then with all of these key points out of the way, let's talk about chips being used. Now, if you have Limitless, like I do still, you should use Limitless in Miami. Like I've said, we know for a fact we're going to have the cheat code of knowing what drivers to put in after sprint qualifying. So there's like no risk to using it. Yes, there'll probably be a few less overtakes than in China. However, it's a much safer track to use it on. Miami, it barely has really good racing, which for us is good because we don't want any crashes while using the Limitless. I can't think of anything worse than getting the Limitless team in and then you got Perez DNFing, Leclerc DNFing. It would be a nightmare. But Miami, this shouldn't happen. So I'm very adamant, if you have Limitless still, you should probably use it in Miami. And then I'll talk about what team to use later on in the video. If you have an extra DRS team set up, which is basically a team with Verstappen and Perez ready to go for the 3 times and 2 times, I'd recommend using that. Now, again, final fix, we'll know really after sprint qualifying if you want to use it. However, I wouldn't really use it on a sprint race weekend, but I wouldn't think about that too much until we actually have the sprint race and you see whether or not you want to get rid of one of your drivers or not. And then if you want any more info on how to use your chips, I've made a video last week detailing which races and which pathways to choose for my chip strategies. So if you've watched that or if you want to watch that briefly, I would not recommend using extra DRS this weekend unless you have the team set up. And I would recommend using wildcard if you don't have enough transfers to get over to the Verstappen team. However, that is all you need to know for the chips going forward into Miami. So let's get on to the most fun part of the video, which is the team selections. You knew it was coming. And as you've been hearing me waffle throughout this video, you'll probably most likely realize that there are 2 categories to the teams you can choose. Of course, you've got the Verstappen teams. However, these teams are more expensive, and I will go over cheaper teams for anyone who's just joining F1 Fantasy or hasn't had much good luck so far this season. But we'll start off with the best Verstappen team you can have, which is 112 million. And this team consists of Verstappen, Tsunoda, Sargent, Magnussen, Hulkenberg with Red Bull and Ferrari. Now, if you have a team like this, it will cost you 112 million. However, Magnussen and Tsunoda, the best cheap drivers in the same team, amazing. You won't actually probably have to change your team for a while now until you can afford someone like Stroll or Alonso with Verstappen. Sargent, a bit of an issue. However, again, like I've said, he's one of the better, cheaper drivers to have if he stays out of trouble and just does not crash. And yes, it's probably the weak point of this team. However, having double Haas and Yuki Tsunoda in your team with Verstappen and Red Bull and Ferrari, you should be scoring a lot of points, especially in the Limitless weekend. With this sort of team, you shouldn't be scoring any less than 320, 330 points. And that's if it doesn't go well. So this is the main team. If you have the Verstappen teams, you want to be pushing forward to. However, we have variations for teams that go down the list. If you've only got 110 million at your disposal, what you would do is drop Magnussen down to an Albon. Now, Albon, again, I'm not too keen on. However, it saves you a lot of money getting down from Magnussen to Albon. It's not too many points drop. On a sprint race weekend, it's probably a 5 to 10 points difference having this team if they both finished a race. So yes, it's a little bit worse, but for 110 million, by no means a bad team. And then we have the lower costing Verstappen team, which is what I run, which is Verstappen, Tsunoda, Sargent, Bottas, Hulkenberg, which is basically dropping Albon down to Bottas. Now, again, it would be better if we had Magnussen over Bottas. However, if Bottas just stays out of trouble, it should be fine. And again, like I can't keep stressing enough, these teams will do better than most Perez, Leclerc and Sainz teams, no matter how bad really they do, bar Verstappen, because Verstappen does so well compared to everyone else, it carries you through. Now, like I said I would do, these are the Perez, Leclerc, Sainz teams. So before we discuss any of these teams, the variation for this whole team, every team I show you, is if Perez looks better, put Perez in this team. If Leclerc looks better, put Leclerc in the team. If Sainz looks better, put Sainz in the team. If Norris looks better, put Norris in the team. That's how it will go for these teams. Technically, they're the budget building teams. They're like medium budget building. However, if you just don't have the funds for a Verstappen team, these are the best teams I would go for. The first team would be Perez, Stroll, Tsunoda, Sargent, Hulkenberg, Red Bull and Ferrari. And this will put you back 108.4 million. Again, the weak point, Logan Sargent. He's not the best, but you sort of just have to deal with it at this point of your F1 fantasy journey. However, Hulkenberg, a great choice in that Haas. Hopefully he doesn't do too well in qualifying and you get some overtake points from him. Again, Yuki Tsunoda. Hopefully he does good in qualifying, stays in the top 10, or has a shocking qualifying like in China, but this time doesn't get destroyed by Magnussen. And then, like I've said, Lance Stroll, yes, he's not actually good in F1 in general. However, with that Aston Martin, whenever he qualifies lower than the top 10, it normally means overtake points and a good price increase of 0.5 million until he gets to 15 million. So it's good for budget building and it's good for getting your points up. Now we drop down to 107 million, which is the second variation of this team. And this is where you drop Hulkenberg down to Bottas. Again, Hulkenberg down to Bottas, it's not too much of a difference. I'd probably say around 5 points difference on average from dropping down to Bottas. However, by no means a bad team. You keep the main two, Perez and Stroll, which are going to be your powerhouses for this team. Of course, you have Red Bull and Ferrari. Again, could change it to McLaren, but I think McLaren is just a little bit too expensive for now because yes, even if McLaren had similar points to Ferrari, Ferrari are more likely to get better pit stop points, so they probably overtake McLaren anyway. So I would steer clear of McLaren still now as a constructor. However, Norris, he could be looking okay if they look good. And then we move down to 105.3 million for anyone who doesn't have any more funds than this. And this is where we drop Stroll down to Magnussen, bring back up Bottas to Hulkenberg. And it's similar to the Verstappen team I did mention as the best team before. Double Haas, Tsunoda in that AlphaTauri, but Albon instead of Sargent and Perez instead of Verstappen with Red Bull and Ferrari. And this team will definitely increase your team value quite a bit and hopefully not get you too many less points than the Verstappen teams. And then we drop down to a 104.1 million team, which we drop Albon down to a Sargent. Again, by no means a bad team. This is completely the same team. Just drop out Verstappen for Perez. As I said, was a good team for Verstappen. So by no means a bad team. It's not going to get you the most points because it's only 104 million. However, if you are at this point of the F1 Fantasy, you will be happy with what this team delivers for you. And then we have the final team for the Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris builds, which is Perez, Magnussen, Tsunoda, Sargent, Bottas, Red Bull and Ferrari. And like I've mentioned before, this is again dropping Hulkenberg down to Bottas. Sargent and Bottas, not the best to have in your team, but by no means a bad team considering this is a very low costing team. So for anyone who's just started F1 Fantasy, maybe hasn't had the best start to the season, this is the sort of team I would go for to start getting your budget up and getting the most points possible in every weekend. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the Limitless team. So for now, it's going to stick to the same as it was in China with Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, Red Bull, Ferrari. However, if McLaren look better than Ferrari, yes, I would probably take the risk and go for McLaren. I only said not to when you have to think about prices, because there's a 2.6 million price difference between Ferrari and McLaren. I don't think that's worth it when you have to think about prices. However, when you don't have to think about prices, it could be worth the risk if McLaren look better in sprint qualifying. Again, if they look better in sprint qualifying as well, I'd probably bring out Leclerc or Sainz, whoever looks worse, and bring in Piastri as well. But that's what Limitless looks like for now. Again, it's quite hard to talk about Limitless right now because it's so dependent on what happens in sprint qualifying. So basically, keep an eye out on my Twitter, keep an eye out on the comments down below if you want any answers, because I will be giving my Limitless team fully prepared for you after the sprint qualifying, as we'll know more by then. And then the final team variation you could have is for anyone who is going for that extra DRS. Even though I said it wasn't the best option, if you are going for it, here is what I would go for. You would need 110.8 million in transfer value to build this team. Verstappen, Perez, and Red Bull are the main three you need when doing extra DRS, and has seemed like the best cheap constructor at the minute to be using. They've actually been doing pretty well the last few weekends. Of course, Sargent and Bottas, slight issues. Sonoda's good, that's okay. However, the main thing about this team is that you just have the best two drivers on 3 times and 2 times, which most weekends are Verstappen and Perez. Again, if you don't have 110.8 million, you can do a 110 million team, which is dropping Sonoda down to Hulkenberg. So I think if you don't have more than 110 million, I wouldn't be recommending extra DRS so far at this point of the season, especially when there's so many better races you could use extra DRS on. However, if you want to, those 2 teams are what I would go to. And then league-wise, of course, we'll do another top 5 shout out for everyone who was in the top 5 of my league so far. And first place, we have Cole F1. Congratulations on 1,395 points. Keep up the good work. I will say I'm coming for you with my Limitless at play in Miami. I'm hoping to catch up a little bit. But congratulations for getting first place in the league so far. I would love to know where you are in the global leagues, because that's got to be at least top 200, top 100, surely. In second place, we have Obi Guan Yu Jobi. Love the name. And they are on 1,388. Congratulations on you. Only 7 points behind Cole F1, so it's looking pretty tight at the top. And remember, there is a £200 prize pool, so there is quite a lot to be fighting over to get that top place in the Zach F1 League at the minute. Then we have Leapers 1. We love to see him doing well. Leapers 1 always does well in the Zach F1 League. He was in it last season as well and did amazingly on 1,384 points. Only 11 points off Cole and 4 points off Obi. So let's see what you can do, Leapers, because oh my god, I know you'll do well. You always smash it out the park. Then in fourth place, we have Bell 2. 1,383 points, only 1 point behind Leapers. Very close there. Congratulations on your fourth place. And then to finish off a very tightly knit group for that top 5, we have #1 Paddock Here I Come, 1,382 points. So third to fifth are covered by 2 points, which is absolutely insane in F1 fantasy terms. That is ridiculously close. So I'm super looking forward to seeing where this battle comes down for the top spot of the Zach F1 League. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you could get something out of this video. Again, like I can't stress enough, I will be live after the sprint qualifying. Follow my Twitter for all updates. I'll try to update you guys on YouTube as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Be careful for that sprint quali, like I can't stress enough, because our teams are going to be dependent on how well everyone does in sprint quali. But anyway, have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you all later for another F1 video. Bye-bye.